is very difficult for most Indian drugs, while China takes that market because China has been exporting drugs into Europe before India has. And therefore Chinese drugs are not banned while Indian drugs get banned. And that's an area which the government is, I think, trying to deal with and sort out in some way. The third, as an area of concern from our health services angle, is the way the both insurance and managed care, which part of it, and large part of it is US, but it's also European, is pushing the vaccine industry and the pharma industry all kinds of not only public-private partnerships in which WHO and the governments underwrite research and pre-research, pre-product what is done? Not just trials, no. You're committing to market to purchase of vaccine policy of Government of India is a clear marker of that, where you're already signing up because you are underwriting the R&D. Because these are seen as such important public health measures, which public health experts would not agree with, but that's what the industry is enforcing. So, and that also has a fallback on the European countries themselves. Again, I'm linking the NHS and its decline back to where they have a very important body which has come up in the last 8 or 9 years to control the use of health technology, because it becomes a big burden on the budget of the NHS itself. And so it's called NICE, National Institute for Clinical Excellence, Clinical and Health Excellence now, which does technology assessment and decides what the government through NHS will buy and what it will not provide through NHS. And that model, the vaccines are not a part of what the NHS, and this NICE body can look at. That's outside, that's not the health technology they can deal with. So there's a whole, and that's where Bill and Melinda Gates and everybody. So it's a US and EU together in this, rather than being in competition in certain ways. They come together on several of these issues. That's it. I think that's all the issues that I could flag.
Thank you for bringing these issues which are normally left out or never mentioned and not discussed, but very important nevertheless. I would like Asit to be brief and share his views.
Professor Sachdeva and Marco. Professor Sachdeva spoke about the service industry in Europe. And if you look at the service industry, we also have a service industry, but in India it's totally different. I mean, the borders. For example, in India we also have this whole term called informal economy, where almost 90% of the labor force is employed. And we have around, of the total labor force, we have around 52% self-employed, and that is a very dicey category, who is self-employed. But in Europe, though Europe is competing in India with service sector, you also have the only informal economy known as one of the senior JNU professors told is the drug industry. So how do you compare between the drug trade, or everything is formal there? But India also has a huge service sector, right from contract to cleaning and etc., but we also have a huge informal sector. And how do you differentiate between all these two? Now coming to again within European trade, on this Ukrainian crisis, there will be sanctions, and Europe also needs natural gas from Russia. How does Europe deal with this question? Now, question to Marco. You spoke about both the extreme right and the extreme left opposing EU. In the PowerPoint presentation, the Green Party said the EU as a historic achievement. And look at the turning point of history. Those were the days when it was becoming a unipolar world. You have the Maastricht Treaty, etc., but you have the single euro currency. And if it is an historic achievement, those were the days also Thatcherism, breaking of the unions, large-scale privatization, and so on and so forth. And this European Union, if it is as a historic achievement, then how do you have, fast emerging third world countries like Greece? I don't think for Greek people it is an historic achievement. So how do you explain this contradiction? Now when it comes to democracy, etc., democracy and peace building, the contradictions are quite glaring. Like after Afghanistan and Iraq, I think it was the European Union and especially France and Germany and France and the UK, they invaded Libya. And the way Germany is emerging as an arm twister to both Ukraine via the Cold War and Greece. How do you explain the aspirations of peace of European Union in this context?
Thank you. Just request Dr. Sunilam to share his views, and after that Hemant, then our panelists will respond to our question.
समय कम है और मुझको लगता है कि हेमंत भाई बोलना चाहते हैं तो बात रखेंगे। सबसे पहले सचदेवा जी को बहुत बधाई कि उन्होंने बहुत अच्छे ढंग से पूरा विस्तृत जानकारी इसको लेकर के दी है। हम लोग किसानों के पर्सपेक्टिव से अगर देखें तो पूरी बहस में यहाँ पर अभी पिछले एक हफ्ते में जो दो खबर आई अल्फांसो आम की और मिर्च की, दोनों को बैन किया गया ईयू के अंदर, उसको लेकर अगर शुरुआत करें और जिस तरीके से डंपिंग होती है उसको लेकर के हम लोग बात करें तो अलग अलग मैनिफेस्टोज के अंदर कुछ भी ऐसा नहीं है जिससे ये कहा जा सके कि एग्रीकल्चर का जो कॉर्पोरेट टेकओवर हो रहा है उसको रोकने में किसी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी की वहां पर कोई दिलचस्पी है। स्वाभाविक तौर पर ईयू जो है वो जैसा यहाँ पर कहा गया कि जो नेशनल इंटरेस्ट है उसी के अंदर जो कॉमन इंटरेस्ट है उसको लेकर के काम वो करता है, तो वो एक साथ जब हमारे सामने आते हैं नेगोशिएटिंग टेबल के ऊपर तो वो इतने ज़्यादा मजबूत बनकर के आते हैं कि शायद भारत के जो नेगोशिएटर्स हैं या भारत सरकार है वो बहुत दुर्बल या तो महसूस करती है या उनके लगभग एजेंट बनकर के वो काम करती है। और इसलिए इस इलेक्शंस के अंदर क्या नतीजे आएंगे, उसका एग्रीकल्चर के ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा, वो बहुत ज़्यादा मायने नहीं रखता, क्योंकि जो वहाँ के लिए कहा गया है उसमें सब्सिडीज जिस तरीके से वहाँ पर दी जाती हैं, हम लोग वो सब्सिडीज को ख़त्म करने की बात नहीं करते। वहाँ पर जो है वो एग्रीकल्चर जैसे यहाँ पर एक वे ऑफ लाइफ है, वहाँ पर एग्रो बिजनेस है और बिजनेस कंपनीज को ही पूरा सब्सिडीज का पूरा लाभ जाता है। इसके बावजूद भी वहाँ पर खेती और छोटा किसान लगातार खत्म हो रहा है, ये तथ्य है। और उसको बचाने के लिए या जो एग्रीकल्चर है उसके अंदर जो एक बड़ा जो सरप्लस वहाँ का एग्रीकल्चर है या उसका जो पूरे तरीके से उसको समुद्र में डाल करके उसे कैसे बचाया, मतलब उससे जो तकलीफें पैदा हो रही हैं पॉल्यूशन की या दूसरी, वो उनके सामने कंसर्न है। लेकिन हमारे सामने जो भूख का सवाल है या जो रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ ग्रेन्स है, ये हमारे लिए बड़ा सवाल है। तो मुझको लगता है कि हम लोगों को विशेष तौर पर ऐसे समय में जब हम लोग यहाँ पर भारत में चुनाव है और उसका नतीजा पहले आ जाएगा 16 तारीख को, आपका नतीजा 25 तारीख को आएगा, लेकिन हिंदुस्तान के पूरे चुनाव के अंदर भी कहीं पर किसी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी ने या कोई चैनल्स ने जो आपने साउथ एशियन पर्सपेक्टिव को लेकर के जो बातचीत रखी, वो किसी को इसकी जरूरत नहीं लगी, क्योंकि लगभग सभी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज उसके ऊपर एक कंसेंसस रखती हैं कि हम लोगों को यूरोप के साथ में अपने रिश्ते बढ़ा करके आगे बढ़ने का काम करना है। तो इसलिए ये पूरी जो चर्चा हम लोग यहाँ पर कर रहे हैं, ये एकेडमिक लेवल के ऊपर तो बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग हम लोगों के ऊपर हो सकती है, और ये भी सही है कि जो उसका इम्पैक्ट है यूरोप का, उसकी इकोनॉमी का विशेष तौर पर पूरे हिंदुस्तान पर, वो बहुत ज्यादा है और वो लगातार बढ़ते जाने वाला है। तो उसको कैसे रेजिस्ट किया जाए, वो हम लोगों के लिए कॉमन इंटरेस्ट की बात हो सकती है, जो सब लोग यहाँ पर इंटरेस्ट में यहाँ पर सब लोग इकट्ठे हैं, लेकिन उसको लेकर के पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज का, हिंदुस्तान के पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज का कंसर्न चाहिए और वो बहुत कम दिखलाई पड़ता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि हम लोगों को यूरोपियन यूनियन के चुनाव के नतीजे में और वहाँ के पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज का जो मैनिफेस्टो है उसमें रुचि जरूर है और उससे कुछ सीख भी सके हम लोग आगे बढ़ सकते हैं। लेकिन उन मैनिफेस्टोज में जो कॉमन हमारे को जो फियर समझ में आता है, जो डर है हमारे लिए, उसको समझ के और उससे कैसे निपटा जाए, ये भी एक देखने की बात है। क्योंकि जो हम कॉर्पोरेट टेकओवर की यहाँ पर बात करते हैं वो वहाँ के सिस्टम का हो चुका है, और जो भी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज हैं मोटे तौर पर वो उनके रिप्रेजेंटेटिव के तौर पर काम करती हैं, ऐसा आमतौर पर माना जाता है। तो हम लोग यहाँ पर, क्योंकि जो ग्रीन पार्टी या जो पीएस का जो पूरा मैनिफेस्टो है उसमें और जो दूसरे मैनिफेस्टोज है उसके अंदर तो क्लियर कट डेमार्केशन हम लोगों को समझ में आता है, लेकिन उसका लाभ हमें कैसे होगा, ये भारत के किसानों को या यहाँ का जो वंचित तबका है या अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर है उसको कैसे होगा, इसके ऊपर बहुत कुछ करना हम लोगों को बाकी है। लेकिन ये जो पूरी डिबेट है ये इन्होंने विजय प्रताप जी ने, सैनिट ने जो ऑर्गेनाइज की, मुझे लगता है कि बहुत यूजफुल रहेगी।
धन्यवाद सुनीलम जी। पवन जी कुछ अपनी बात रखना चाहें? श्योर। हेमंत जी।
Thank you very much for all the inputs that we have had so far. I just want to continue what Dr. Sunilam ji was telling. I want to raise 4 points briefly, point to point. There has been no mention about is there any consensus or policy or any offer on the GMOs. That is not clear in this European elections. Whether it has come as an agenda or manifesto or debate, that is not clear.
Green Party is.
It is not clearly come. And second one is most important. How come there has been no debate in Europe since long about the percolation of incomes of companies to the common man there? Though the companies are very hugely usurping the banks, and still there is no debate about percolation. This is something strange. This is second. And third is there is no mention about the money laundering that is very huge in Europe. Money laundering is happening in many countries and pushing the real estate activity so up that the common man in Europe himself is suffering from that. And why the people and parties are keeping mum on that is not known. That is the third. Fourth one is more shocking. I think that might be the reason. I think Professor Sachdeva was referring about shift from left to the right. That is mainly because I think Europe is aging. That aging Europe is should be taken seriously now, because it is making them more conservative, more protective for themselves, and at the same time they are resisting two things. If India wants to send something manufactured here, then they put all kind of bans, all kind of attack on that. But at the same time, when they outsource the manufacturing because of their aging, then they want to trade with the manufactured goods in third world countries or including in India. And again, back home, when they make profit out of that trade, that percolation is again not removed. These are things which I think Indians should take more seriously. And as Dr. Sunilam ji was saying, the ban is increasing on Indian agriculture produce to appear in Europe market, and not just Aam and Mirchi. The ban has caused a loss of more than 6,000 crores for Indian farmers when they banned the Mirchi. Aam, that is mango ban, has also caused a lot of distress. And also, they have banned the import or export from India for rice also, very good variety of rice, which is ruling the world today, but it is banned in Europe. This is all something strange which we should take seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemant. I request the panelists to respond. First, Sachdeva and then Marco.
Vijay.
We have roughly 13 minutes time to our
Food is ready.
food is ready, but that's not the problem.
Yeah.
Well, I'll finish in three minutes.
No, please take your 5 to 6 minutes.
Well, you know, I'm really glad that people really participated in a very serious manner in many of those issues concerning Europe and manifestos. There were a couple of comments and there were a couple of questions. So I'll just pick up few of them. I may not be able to answer all of them. One is, in fact, you know, if you look at the composition of the parliament, there was concern was raised that, you know, now there's more extreme left, extreme right parties entering into the parliament. But the fact of the real politics is different in European parliament. Still, you will have two groups, major groups, both conservative and the socialist group. And if you look at the past record of a couple of parliaments, the research has shown that roughly about an 80% time, both of them have cooperated, conservative as well as left. And in fact, you can see even, I mean, when you have a president of the European Parliament, 2.5 years, every time for 2.5 years it's a conservative president and 2.5 years socialist president. And they might have a problem in electing the president because you don't have two presidents, otherwise they could have worked out there as well. And broadly, both of them are pro-European. I mean, there's no doubt about this. There would be some differences in the policies, but when it comes to particularly the trade issues, if actually the European bureaucrats are able to negotiate successfully with the Americans or with anybody else in India and somewhere else, I don't think there will be any serious opposition from the parliament. I mean, I don't see that happening. I mean, there might be few comments here on human rights or something here and there, but once it is done, it will be done. I mean, the parliament is not going to stop any of those agreements, practically. But yes, there is a less of interest in the European Parliament. You can see, last time it was only 43% people those who actually voted in the elections. And this time it would be even less perhaps. So there is a bit of a problem of European institutions really creating enthusiasm within the European voters. Now the second question, I think many of the issues which you raised about India-EU FTA. I mean, since there was no time, I didn't go into detail about negotiations and other issues. First thing is that, you know, many of those things we really don't know what negotiations are actually happening. I mean, the negotiations are on since 2007. These are secret. So many of those fears which one can read here or there, I mean, they are just on the basis of guess, I mean, rather than actually what the negotiations are. Particularly, say, for example, you're saying on agriculture. Now, as far as my whatever information is on agriculture, I mean, you know, even by early 2008 or 2009, particular trade on goods, both sides have more or less agreed to include 90% of the goods, and keeping European agriculture out, Indian agriculture broadly out. So we were not really negotiating on agriculture, majority of the items. At the same time, on investment and others, I mean, still, I mean, there are serious issues, but still we don't know the full information. It's not really, I mean, and even on the pharmaceuticals, I mean, I don't really see much of the opposition coming from Indian pharma companies. In fact, more opposition you can see from European NGOs actually saying that this is how it is going to affect Indian pharma industry. But Indian pharma industry is not saying really much because the government has made it very clear that as far as the data exclusivity clause is concerned, we are not going to negotiate on that at all. So, I mean, I would like to believe the minister saying something that we are not negotiating rather than one some European NGO is raising issue and I'm concerning too much about this, that this is what is going to happen. So one has to be a bit clear about many of those issues because still, but yes, I mean, you know, one has to be very careful when you are negotiating. I mean, there must be some very serious issues, I believe, that's why in fact it has dragged on for so long. Now, on this issue of what Europe, I think you raised one question. I mean, after Second World War, because the US with the Marshall Plan and everything else helped Europe, and this particular juncture when you have this crisis in Europe, and the US itself is on a relative decline. But I think it's a very different issue altogether. Now, the crisis in Europe is not that the Europe has a shortage of actually resources. It's not the problem. I mean, they have enough resources to tackle the issue within Europe itself. But the only problem is that within the institutional framework which they have built and the kind of integration which has been built over the years, now it's not very easy to put certain things. I mean, like even under the Lisbon Treaty, you can't even bail out any of the countries where actually they are having this kind of trouble. So that's why they have to rope in even the IMF and other institutions to put certain conditionalities and other things. So it's not a question of resources. I think even now, despite whatever decline one can say, I mean, or whatever the problem Europe is facing, I think they have enough resources to deal with the problems within Europe itself. I mean, despite all 3-4 years when there was a crisis in Europe, I mean, German economy was doing perfectly all right. I mean, in the last 3-4 years. So one of the biggest economy in Europe was doing well. So they have enough resources. The only thing is that they have to now build certain institutions through which they can tackle many of those issues which earlier perhaps they were not thinking of. I mean, that's why in fact many people rather say, as you have said, that this crisis has also given many more opportunities to Europe. Because in the 90s one can see they had a very successful project of European enlargement. Then you have a successful project of introduction of Euro. And after that, basically there was no major European project. Now, as a result of this crisis, one can even see, they are talking about common euro bond, they are talking about common fiscal policy, they are talking about banking union. So many more integration projects are in line. If they, put their things together, maybe, I mean, one can see even more integration happening within Europe. Now, on the question of, I think another question was raised, whether should we link our trade policies with immigration policies. Well, I mean, I think what perhaps, I mean, it may not be direct linkages between immigration or something, because it's not our declared policy that we want to send our people outside or something, but particularly in some areas where we feel that we are actually have certain comparative advantage, like you mentioned about Mode 4 services. So these are the kind of things which we would like to put on the agenda, particularly when we are negotiating.
Even in health services, nursing area, that for the Indians are aging, they need these people, and maybe
Well, it's both ways. I mean, if they feel that we can provide something, I mean, I think we can always work. And just one last one, particularly about the issue about agriculture and the ban on Alfonso Mango and other things. And I think in the broader perspective, if you look at the total overall trade and other things happening, I think the ban on Alfonso would be, it may not be that big, but this will give a very bad publicity to Europe per se, particularly when you are negotiating with India and you need certain critical support in the civil society organization as well as the political support. And in that kind of environment, I think it was not very wise from the point of view of the Europe to put those kind of issues, and particularly when the new government is coming, hopefully some negotiations will come in a serious manner on India-EU FTA. But the European bureaucracy works in a very different manner, than so they're just one by one many of those things. But the larger question is about the whole, there was one of the two mentions here or there in some of the manifestos about the common agricultural policy. But none of the political groups actually are seriously talking about reforming common agricultural policy in the European Union, which is really, I mean, you can see that they are not having comparative advantage in agriculture. This is quite clear. Still, they keep subsidizing, and within that, creating a lot of problem within Europe itself. But it means one can see, I mean, and already now the funding for the common agricultural policy has already been committed for the next 5-7 years. So you don't really see any major reform happening as far as agriculture in Europe is concerned. And that's so, and no political party is really talking about that, which is a serious issue. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another half an hour to continue discussion informally during lunch. So that please include those hours for discussion. I will request Marco to respond quickly and then Vijay Pratap to share his views.
Okay, thank you very much for very insightful comments and questions. I'll be really brief, something I think just highlighting something that I hope we can sort of look at closely together even. One is the issue of taxation which was raised, and I think that's important to note that the European Union is not a taxation union, that in field of taxations decisions have to be taken unanimously, which means that any one country can have a veto right, and therefore establishing even minimum tax levels on certain things like capital income or alcohol or things like that is not, or energy is not happening, and I think that's part of one of the sort of the decisions made very much of like this corporate interest that the kind of socialist project of directing the economy through tax policies is not happening on a European level. And one outcome of this is the quite massive tax evasion and tax planning that is estimated at 1,000 billion euros is sort of lost annually because of the loopholes and tax havens and so on. And major parties or the rightist parties and governments are not ready to act on this. On energy and sort of the new vision, new economic vision, and on the green position on Europe in general. I think, like myself, I belong to the majority in the Greens, which are quite critical of the European project because of the corporate-driven agenda. And it's a bit of a gamble to say that we want strong and good Europe without being able to create the basis, for example, this taxation becoming more democratic. So for example, raising issues of this like overconsumption of natural resources, overconsumption of energy, then many friends in the Green Party said, yeah, we agree, but we don't get votes on that agenda. So as long as the public sphere, the press is dominated by private interest, then this sort of deadlock we are in. And geopolitically, I think that's something that South Asia, India, and Europe could and needs to look together. That always Russia has been and Turkey have been part of the European geopolitical dynamics, and now with the Ukraine crisis, then it's becoming more acute. But as far as energy flows, there's no impact. We're still comfortable buying Gazprom gas in any quantity that it's available. But then, like India and Europe, both are dependent on imported energy. So I think coming up with cultural transformations and political transformations, which would be that creating more self-sufficiency and through sustainable energy sources should be quite high on the agenda. On migration, I think Europeans would have much to learn from here about living with diversity. That in EU, in the European context, like there's this lot of this xenophobic right, which is against immigration, against any new religions or complexions being part of our communities. Like once my friend Vijay Pratap was saying that why can't the French deal with a turban, that in the schools you can't wear a turban or a scarf because schools are supposed not to be any religious insignia in them. So I think on migration, I think for economic interest, and definitely we welcome a lot of migration, but for cultural reasons, it will not be happening in a very big way, it seems. Thank you.
Vijay Pratap ji.
Friends, this is just to extend the invitation for some future date, because today's discussions have been, as an organizer, have been very humbling. In a way, one is overwhelmed by the layers and the dimensions of the issues one needs to learn. So both from Saided and Vasudev viewpoint, it was a very humbling experience because of the richness and the vastness of the topics covered in the keynote presentation and then questions by others. I would only say in terms of through email, if you could all send your inputs, what kind of discussion we should carry on, because even on the material part, whole lot of things still need to be discussed. People of Indian origin and foreigners and a particular species of NGOs in India are lobbying very discreetly through parliamentarians, through ministries. They are sitting there in the ministries and getting our laws changed. So in India, Asit Das was talking about 90% of unorganized sector. Even of the organized sector, the 7%, people are working against the entire 90%, 99%, maybe 99.9%, except 10-15 families at the top. Rest, there are organized, very well-oiled machinery of lobbyists, of NGOs, of consultants who are sitting in our ministries and getting the laws made to big law firms which help US and the EU and other European companies in a big way. You know, Soumya ji talked about extractive and the exploitative nature of our economy vis-a-vis the natural resources. I remember this interesting anecdote. Plachimara in Kerala, lot of groundwater has been extracted by Coca-Cola plant. There was agitation. Local CPM MLA was the leader, along with the JDS leader MP Virendra Kumar, who brings out this daily newspaper, quite a respected one, Mathrubhumi. And they were agitating against this groundwater exploitation. And Congress retorted back that why are you agitating? It was during left front government that this Coca-Cola plant was given the license. So eventually Harkishan Singh Surjit, General Secretary of Communist Party, had to reveal the truth, which was that Kerala did not have the money to pay salary to its employees, so it wanted a loan from ADB, and ADB had put a condition that you put up this plant. Now, this is an American company which extracts water and repatriates dollars to the US. Now, that company is also lobbied by the ambassadors of US and also by ADBs and World Banks. So this kind of global financial architecture, the way they work through their lobbyists and our global consensus on chasing American paradise, these are issues